Ens fa molt feliços i hem d'agrair a Rosa dels Vents, a la Campana, que ens hagin permès de tenir la conversa que ara mantindrem amb un dels grans escriptors que ha estat capaç de plasmar 1.000 històries i que en aquest cas concret de la novel·la de la que parlarem avui no sabem pas si té una bola de vidre. Ken Follett, good afternoon.
Good evening. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting.
How are you?
I'm very well.
Estava comentant, I'm going to talk to you in Catalan, okay? And Carol Badia will be translating for you my questions. L'última vegada que vaig entrevistar Ken Follett era per la columna de Foc i vam parlar d'una altra època que no té res a veure amb Neva, mai, amb aquesta novel·la de la que parlarem avui, però se centrava en el regnat d'Elisabet I. I justament ara que estem en dies de dols i funerals de la reina Elisabet II, jo pensava, el Ken Follett li deu estar bullint el cap ja amb històries al voltant de tot el que ha significat el regnat d'Elisabet II. Quina època triaria Ken Follett per novel·lar de tot el que ha viscut la reina Elisabet II?
Oh, I think it would have to be the Second World War, when she was a teenager, I guess. And it would be really interesting, wouldn't it, to see that terrible and very dramatic war from the point of view of a girl or maybe a young woman, but a very special young woman who would know everything and would be a royal person, but she's a child, so she can't do anything. I think that would give you a very good perspective on those dramatic events.
Ken Follett, en la novel·la Never, mai, tria una presidenta dona dels Estats Units, la Pauline. I jo li he escoltat dir en alguna entrevista que ho fa perquè creu que seria una persona més reflexiva, més moderada, i ara justament té una primera ministra dona, Elizabeth Truss. Les dones, la Pauline i l'Elizabeth, tenen alguna cosa en comú o és massa aviat per fer aquest judici?
Tragically, I don't think Liz Truss has anything in common with the wonderful fictional president of the United States, Pauline Green, who I invented. When I invent politicians, I sometimes make them a lot better than the real thing, and this is certainly a case. No, I don't think. See, I picked a woman for president of the United States because in Never, everybody is trying to avoid a war. All the presidents and prime ministers and emperors are trying to avoid a war. And so I needed the American president to be somebody who did not want a war. And I just thought that it was more plausible if that person was a woman. Now, I know that it's very dangerous to make generalizations about men and women and say, well, men are like this and women are like that, because quite a lot of those generalizations just come from prejudice, don't they? But I think we might all agree that a woman is less likely to get into a fight in a bar than a man. I've never seen two women fighting in a bar. I also think we might agree that a woman politician might be less likely to declare war than a man. So that was my thinking. Now, I may be completely wrong.
Aquest estiu, mentre llegia la seva novel·la, pensava, home, Ken Follett va triar la Xina i Corea del Nord perquè segurament si hagués triat Rússia seria massa obvi, no? I ell volia triar un imaginari que fos desconegut. Però quan ho escrivia no pensava que Vladimir Putin pogués envair Ucraïna, no?
One of my advisors, Catherine Ashton, who was the European First Minister for Defence, said to me, she read the book before it was published and helped me with it. And she said, "You've chosen to have a war with China, but I think it's the greater danger is a war with Russia." And I didn't believe her. So she was right and I was wrong. The other thing about it is we've lived with the fear of a war with Russia for most of my life, really. The Soviets exploded their first atom bomb in 1949. That was the year I was born. And so all my life there has been that danger of a nuclear war with the Soviets. But the Chinese are a new power. They haven't been this powerful and this rich for very many years. And so I thought it was, in a novel, it was really more interesting to explore what they might do. We've been talking about the Russians for a long time, and there are many books have been written about our conflict with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And if for people to enjoy the novel, it has to be a bit different from everything they've ever read before.
Té molta raó, però el repte majúscul per Ken Follett devia ser saber com funcionava no únicament Corea del Nord, no únicament la lògica política de Corea del Nord, sinó també de la Xina, no? I com funcionaven els seus serveis secrets, i ara parlarem dels serveis secrets dels països. Aquest era el gran repte per vostè, no?
Yes, it certainly was. The United States is easy because it's an open society. They tell us everything. You ask them questions and they'll tell you the answer. And the Chinese government is very secretive. They don't want us to know, but things come out. So, for example, you'll remember in the story, a lot of the Chinese government has a kind of campus where they have most of the big government buildings, and it's called Zhongnan High. And I set a lot of scenes in that compound. There are 2 lakes and lots of palaces. And of course, if I went to Beijing and said, "Can I go into Zhongnan High and look around because I'm writing a book about it," they would say, "Get lost, Ken Follett." But there was a short period of time in the Mao era when people were allowed in, and a lot of photographs were taken. And so on the internet, there are photographs and maps of the inside of that place. So that was very helpful. But mainly I had help from experts on China, people who study China, university professors and so on, who study China and who know everything there is, everything that can be known. And several of those people helped me with the book.
És molt interessant veure com en aquest thriller de Ken Follett humanitza alguns personatges, el Kei, que és una figura clau de la trama xinesa amb Corea, que és un agent dels serveis d'intel·ligència xinesos, humanitza totes les persones implicades en les trames d'informació i intel·ligència als Estats Units, però en canvi, la vella guàrdia xinesa i els coreans i els jihadistes són els que menys arribem a entrar-hi humanament. Els personatges en els que Ken Follett entra humanament són aquells que defensa vostè?
I'm not really an advocate, but they're not interesting if they're not human. And, although Never is set against, the plot in Never is all about international diplomacy and the threat of war and nations preparing for war, nations quarreling. But the action is all seen through the eyes of people, and the drama is the way those people feel about it. A lot of the time they're scared because they're in dangerous situations, or they're hopeful because they're trying to solve a political problem without violence. And really what drives us as readers, what drives us through the story is our concern for those people. So they can't be robots. They have to be human. They have to have a life outside the plot. Mm-hmm. And that's why, for example, Chiang Kai is married to a very beautiful woman who's a movie star. It's also because we don't we're sort of Hollywood oriented and we think movie stars are all in California. But the fact is there are much bigger movie stars in places like India and China. And I thought that was a fun thing to bring out, that she's a celebrity. She's a star in China, and he's married to her and he's crazy about her. And he's really afraid that all these handsome young actors that she works with are going to be more attractive than he is. But of course, she loves him. So when he goes to work and he has all these worries about what the United States is going to do and what the North Koreans are going to do, what the South Koreans are going to do, what will Japan do? He has all these worries, but we sort of share his anxiety because we know him as a person.
Mm-hmm. Ken Follett ens està situant en l'univers de personatges, que és molt ric, com sempre ho són les seves novel·les. Kei i Ting, que són la parella xinesa, la Tamara i el Tap, l'Abdul i la Kia, la Pauline i el Gus, són 4 parelles molt protagonistes d'aquesta novel·la, de les trames emocionals d'aquesta novel·la, i després hi ha la relació dels serveis secrets dels diferents països. La lògica amb la que treballen tots els serveis secrets del món, també la xinesa, també la relació entre el Nil i el Kei, és precisament fidelitat al màxim al país que defenses i humanitat pel que fa a les persones que t'informen des dels altres països. Aquesta és la lògica de tots els serveis secrets dels grans actors geoestratègics d'aquesta novel·la?
Well, I do think that the government of China and the government of the United States and their secret services have a lot in common. Because in the United States, President Pauline Green is a moderate Republican. And so she has a rival who is an extreme Republican, like Donald Trump. And so as well as trying to deal with the Chinese, she's also got to deal with this extremist politician in the United States. And it's similar in China. The government of China, and Chiang Kai in particular, is a moderate. He doesn't want to destroy the world. He wants to make peace, and he wants everybody to be at peace and prosperous. But there are the old guard in China, and his father belongs to that old guard. What they say is, we won the revolution, and we're never going to let go of the power that we won in the revolution, even if it means we have to go to war. So really, they're extremists, just like the Donald Trump character and all those people who support Donald Trump. And so actually, I feel I portrayed the similarities between the problems of the Chinese government and the problems of the United States government.
El punt de partida de per què Ken Follett ha fet aquesta novel·la, aquest thriller, és que a la Primera Guerra Mundial ningú volia la Primera Guerra Mundial i un cúmul de circumstàncies van fer que al final, patapam, ja la vam tenir. Però si llegiu de seguida, quan obriu el llibre, veureu que ell utilitza un proverbi xinès que diu 2 tigres no poden compartir la mateixa muntanya. Al segle XXI, la situació geoestratègica fa que cada vegada hi ha menys tigres aquí. Només amb 2 tigres ja ens carreguem el planeta, ens carreguem la humanitat. Per tant, no us dic si passa o no, perquè no us diré què passa en el llibre, però podria carregar-se la humanitat. Només 2 tigres, Estats Units i la Xina, podrien arribar a carregar-se la humanitat. És encara més difícil, no?
Well, I think it's more difficult to keep the peace. 100 years ago, there was a terrible war in Europe, but it was mainly a war in Europe. I know it spread to other areas as well, but it was mainly a war in Europe. And also, we knew that they couldn't destroy the world. They didn't have big enough bombs in those days. Those were the days, the good old days, when nobody had a bomb big enough to destroy the world. So it is different. And I think part of the reason why this story came to me was my feeling that the world has become much more dangerous than it used to be. And the danger, and war, of course, is really only one of the dangers. We're in danger in other ways now. We're in danger because we're changing the climate, and we don't know where that's going to lead. We don't know whether we're going to be able to drink the water and breathe the air in 10 years' time. So there's a feel. I think there's a feeling in the world that it's not as safe as it used to be, and that was probably all in the back of my mind when I came up with the story of Never.
I a més, el rerefons de tota l'obra és el canvi climàtic hi és perquè la Kia fuig del Txad i de la seva terra pel canvi climàtic i per la pobresa que hi ha i a més per la situació de guerra amb l'estat islàmic, etc. Però el canvi climàtic està molt present i està present en aquesta plot, en aquest argument, però alhora dius, tant si és pel canvi climàtic com si és per les circumstàncies de la incapacitat de mantenir la pau, la humanitat es carrega el planeta, no?
It's certainly a possibility, and you mentioned Kia, who's the young Arab woman in Chad, and she lives on the shore of a lake, which used to be 10,000 square miles. What is that? 20,000 square kilometers, I think. And now it's only 500 square miles. It's about 1,000 square kilometers. And I thought the fact that such a huge lake had dried up so much was a tremendous symbol of climate change. I didn't know until I started to do research for Never. I didn't know about Lake Chad. I didn't know there had been this huge lake in the middle of the Sahara Desert, which had fed millions of people with fish and with water for their crops and so on. And I was very struck by it. And of course, what happens is that Kia can no longer, because of the shrinking of the lake, she can't feed her child. She's got no way to make a living. And so she's forced to flee. And she does what millions of people try to do. She tries to get to Europe, because at least in Europe, pretty much everybody can find a way to get food to feed their children and to get somewhere for their children to sleep. And I thought that symbol of the shrinking lake and her journey, her terribly dangerous journey across the Sahara Desert, and ending up in Europe, where of course all of us in Europe are driving our enormous cars and running our air conditioners and poisoning the planet. And I thought that symbolism seemed to me so striking, from the drying up lake to the land where people are poisoning the atmosphere, and that's us.
Ken Follett, hi ha un missatge també en el llibre per a Europa, perquè en la trama del thriller Never, Mai, Europa pinta poc en la resolució de les tensions polítiques.
Yes, that's right. And some of my publishers said to me, can't you try and get some Europeans in just for commercial reasons, you know? But no, I couldn't. And because when I conceived this story, I couldn't see any way that it would matter what the Europeans said or did, what we said or did. I mean, least of all Britain, but Europe is big and powerful. The European community is big and powerful, but it wouldn't matter what they said, and they wouldn't join in. Now, that might mean is that because we're so smart? We're so smart that we don't get involved in the war. That's actually quite a good strategy.
Jo m'atreveixo a dir que vostè en cap moment es planteja que no hi hagi cap líder europeu que pugui realment incidir de manera determinant en la resolució d'un conflicte a escala mundial, hipotèticament, no?
Oh, I think it's very good that Europe now has a foreign policy, and because I think individual countries, you know, Spain and Germany and Italy and France are much more powerful together on their own. All European countries on their own are really small and not very powerful by comparison with the United States and China and Russia. But together, I think the European countries are equal to those superpowers. And really, the only way to take part in international diplomacy and to have any influence on the great events in the world now is to be part of a huge power like Europe. And of course, what that means is that for the foreseeable future, Britain has no influence whatsoever. But the countries in the European Union can have a lot of influence on world events. But I do hope that they use that influence to stay out of wars.
Esperem que sí, esperem que sí. Ken Follett, a partir de on s'ha fabricat una arma? On s'ha fabricat una arma? És una arma xinesa que mata una persona, un nord-americà, i a partir d'aquí, pum, 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 hi ha tot un seguit de fets que es van entrellaçant i que porten a l'abisme. En paral·lel, les vides dels responsables de la informació van teixint la possibilitat i estrenyent totes les seves forces perquè no hi hagi una desgràcia, i de DEFCON 5, DEFCON 4, DEFCON 3, DEFCON 2 i fins a arribar a una hipotètica tercera guerra mundial. Realment, també és una reflexió sobre la consciència amb la que fem cadascuna de les coses que fem, perquè una petita cosa pot desencadenar realment una situació final com la que vostè planteja?
Yes, and that's exactly what happened in July 1914 at the outbreak of the terrible First World War. And it's called escalation because when another country does something bad, then we want to hit back. And in the case of the First World War, it was really something not very important. It was an assassination, but the man killed was not the Emperor of Austria. He was the nephew of the Emperor of Austria. And really, it shouldn't, that should not have caused a world war. But it did because once after the assassination, the Emperor of Austria had to punish Serbia. And so he invaded Serbia. And that got the Russians all worried. And so they mobilized their army. And so step by step, the European countries all moved closer and closer to a terrible war. And something very similar happens in Never. Nobody really wants the war, but the Americans really feel they've got to do something about these Chinese weapons being used to kill American GIs in Africa. They feel they've got to do something. And when they do something, then somebody else feels they have to do something. And that's called escalation. And that is the terrible danger. That the final outbreak of war is the result of a long series of maneuvers that countries make without wanting a war. But they make these moves, and those moves scare other countries. And so the situation gets more and more tense. And if we're not very careful, it ends in a war. So for me, escalation is the danger. There will always be little quarrels between countries, or even quite big quarrels between countries. But what we have to do is we have to be very careful that we don't let these quarrels get out of control.
I això ha passat aquest estiu, i vostè ho deu haver viscut amb perplexitat, que la visita de Nancy Pelosi a Taiwan, de cop i volta, tensa les relacions Xina-Estats Units. Ken Follett devia estar dient, m'estan fent un anunci, a mi, al meu llibre. M'estan regalant la campanya comercial, no?
Yes, that's absolutely right. So one very old American lady, very bright, very smart lady, but very old, goes to Taiwan, and suddenly the Chinese are deploying hundreds of weapons. They're deploying battleships and artillery and rockets just because this old lady went to Taiwan. And that's escalation. That's how it happens. Now, fortunately, when they deployed all those weapons, the Americans did not respond to that. They didn't say, right, we're going to deploy all our weapons. Nancy Pelosi, who, by the way, as well as being smart, she must be brave, right? I mean, would I go to Taiwan if the Chinese were deploying all those weapons? I think I would have made the plane turn around in midair and go back to Washington. So she's got a lot of guts, but it was a very dangerous situation.
Ho era. Per fer aquest llibre, Ken Follett ha parlat amb ambaixadors, amb polítics, amb membres dels serveis secrets, i vaig sentir-li una entrevista als Estats Units on vostè deia que era molt important que els personatges de les novel·les fossin creïbles, perquè a vegades els personatges reals són tan simples que en una novel·la els poses i dius, això no cola, això no és creïble. Què li han explicat aquests ambaixadors polítics que vostè hagi dit, escolta, això és increïble, no entraria mai en una novel·la?
Well, one of the things is when these people speak publicly, they're always very definite and they're very sure of themselves. And when you talk to them in person, you discover that, of course, they're just like the rest of us. Some of the time, they're not sure what is the best thing to do. And they worry. And they've got to make a decision. They've got to do something. And then they lie awake at night thinking, have I done the right thing? Or is my decision going to lead to disaster? And will I be responsible, for people dying and that kind of thing? And so what I got from all that was a sense of how human they are, even though they have to, it's in the nature of their job that they have to appear supremely confident when they speak in public.
Mm-hmm. L'amor té un paper també en aquesta novel·la perquè vostè vol que nosaltres ens enganxem a la història, no només hi ha un thriller que va fent salts interessants en diferents escenaris geoestratègics, sinó que, a més, l'amor hi està present en les diferents relacions que ja hem esmentat d'aquestes parelles. També hi ha un missatge de dir, com més a prop estem del final, d'aniquilar-nos a nosaltres mateixos, més ens agafem en allò que ens reté a la vida, que és l'amor i la passió?
Well, yes, I certainly think that's true. But also, when I'm writing the story, I really want you, the reader, to care about this. I want you to worry, and I want you to hope that everything will be well for them. So you have to like some of these people. And part of liking them is to show somebody else loving them. So the reason, part of the reason anyway, why there are always love stories in my books is that if they're great people and we're on their side and we really like them, we really understand that there's somebody who loves that person. And, with a character who's always on his own, like James Bond, say. James Bond, he's got no wife, no kids, no parents. He's always on his own. And you've got to wonder, what's wrong with him? Why hasn't some woman nailed his foot to the floor? He should be married. He should have kids. He's a great guy. He's smart. He's tough. He'd be a great dad. But he's not. He's a loner, and he's a kind of superhero, so that's okay. But it's in more realistic novels, it's really important that the main characters are surrounded by people they love and people who love them. That's natural, and it's also what makes them attractive to us.
Però quan parles amb gent que s'ha dedicat en aquest negoci de l'espionatge i la infiltració, permetre's aquesta vida que vostè retrata per l'Abdul, que és la història amb la Kia, no és molt realista, en realitat, no? Vostè allà fa un I wish it was possible for Abdul to have this life, però en realitat és molt difícil que una persona que viu en la infiltració i més en grups jihadistes pugui triar, pugui decidir, no?
Did you think so? I think in real life, there are a lot of undercover agents all over the place. And sometimes they're found out and they're arrested and they're put in jail or they're sent back to the country they came from. No, I don't think Abdul is unrealistic at all. He works for the CIA, as thousands of people do, and he works undercover, as quite a lot of people do. And of course, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people make the journey that Abdul and Kia make across the Sahara Desert and try and cross the Mediterranean and come to Europe. So I don't see, and you know, he doesn't have any superpowers. He's not super smart, and he's not super handsome or anything. So I think Abdul is quite realistic.
Li hem d'agrair a Ken Follett que hagi escrit una trama que expliqui bé el que està passant amb les migracions pel canvi climàtic, també per la guerra, ho estem vivint a Síria. Barcelona és una ciutat que ha rebut milers i milers de persones i que molt a prop d'aquí hi ha vaixells de rescat com el de l'Open Arms que intenten salvar vides al mar. Des dels Estats Units els hi ha descobert, perquè vostè ha fet promoció lògicament d'aquest llibre també allà, que coses que realment eren més desconegudes als Estats Units que no pas a Europa. Ha notat la diferència en la percepció de la novel·la?
Well, the United States is the only place where some readers complain about my politics. Some readers say, Follett's biased because of his politics. Everybody knows. I don't make a secret of it. You know, I'm left of centre. I support the Labour Party, which is the British equivalent of the Democrats in the States, and my wife Barbara was a member of Parliament for the Labour Party for some years. So everybody knows where my heart is. But I do try very hard not to be biased in my writing because, you know, if in one of my books, if the lefties were all nice people and the conservatives were all horrible, you wouldn't read the book. You'd say, this is stupid, and it would be stupid. So no matter what your politics are, when you come to write a novel, it has to seem plausible to the readers, and many of the readers, maybe most of the readers, won't necessarily share my political ideas and my political leanings, and that must never matter. They must never think, you know, they must never feel that the person writing this is somebody who just wants to teach them a lesson. That's the last thing I want to do. I just want to write an exciting story.
I una altra cosa, vostè abans deia que vivim en un món més insegur perquè, evidentment, armes nuclears, i ho hem vist, ho estem vivint ara a Ucraïna, no únicament amb el patiment de moltes persones que afortunadament troben refugi en altres països fugint del seu país, sinó que estan allà. Tenim una central nuclear, la central de la Zaporizhzhia, que està molt a la vora d'aquesta situació de tensió en la que estem vivint amb Rússia. Vostè creu que la gent és conscient que únicament per una mala decisió això se'n pot anar tot en orris? Ha notat que la gent tingui por davant de la situació que ha desencadenat aquesta guerra?
Yes, I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it because we all, and I think Putin is more dangerous than any of the communist leaders because people like Brezhnev and Khrushchev, they had a Politburo all around them which would restrain them. They couldn't do anything they liked. It was a collective government, even though there was one person who was secretary of the Communist Party and the most powerful man. It was always a man. There were people around him, and it was more of a collective decision. And I think it's much more dangerous when that power, those nuclear bombs, are in the hands of one person. That's a very dangerous, but that's the situation we face now with Ukraine and Russia, and the terrible worry. All of us in Western Europe want the Ukrainians to win, but the terrible danger is if they're winning, will Putin use a nuclear weapon? And if he does, what the heck happens then?
Això és el que li fa por.
Yeah.
I ens està dient que això implicaria deixar que ell guanyés per no generar més escalada?
Well, of course not. No, we can't do that, can we? And first of all, the decision isn't really it's not really in our hands at all. But even if it was, no, we couldn't do that. And so we're stuck. And this is what happens. And it happens in international politics a lot. You're stuck in a situation, you can't move forward and you can't move back. And I think it's very worrying. You know, we all cheer. And our newspapers cheer when the Ukrainians do well. They're doing very well at the moment, the Ukrainians, and they're beating the Russians at the moment. But you've always got to ask, what happens next? Okay, let's say the Ukrainians beat the Russian army. What happens next? Is Putin going to say, oh, well, sorry, guys, I made a mistake. Let's go back to normal? No, I don't think he is.
No. Sure. Escolti, hi ha una frase que vostè posa en boca d'un dels seus personatges que m'interessa molt. Diu, la incompetència és terriblement estable. La incompetència pot ser terriblement estable. M'encanta. Jo crec que si m'he de quedar amb alguna de les frases d'aquest llibre és aquesta. Per què l'escriu?
Well, it's very disappointing, isn't it? Because when politicians are really bad at what they do, and when the country goes downhill, the economy's in trouble, people haven't got enough money, and the electricity doesn't work, and all that kind of thing, we say, well, the leaders are incompetent, but they stay in power. We really want we say, well, that person ought to resign and somebody else ought to take over, and it doesn't happen. And sometimes it goes on for years. I mean, the economy of the Soviet Union was terrible for decades, and but the Communist Party remained in power. It's depressing how long incompetent people stay in power.
Ken Follett, es quedarà en el segle XXI o amb el que està escrivint, que ens consta que està escrivint, perquè no deixa mai de fer-ho, ha tornat enrere? A quin segle està ara?
Well, you know, I finished Never about 18 months ago, and I don't stop. So for about a year and a half, I've been working on a new novel, but my publishers haven't announced it yet, and they don't want me to say what it's about because they want to make a big press announcement, you know, with the cover of and all that sort of thing. So they'll get cross with me if I tell you what it's all about. So I apologize that I can't answer that question, but I am writing another novel.
Però no em diràs si està en aquest segle, no?
Not even a century. Sorry.
Ni això.
I hate to say I can't answer that.
Molt bé, Ken Follett, moltíssimes gràcies per acompanyar-nos avui a la Setmana del Llibre Català. Gràcies a la Rosa dels Vents per aquesta magnífica traducció de Neva, en Mai, i per aquesta conversa. Una altra vegada, un plaer, moltes gràcies.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Gràcies també. Moltes gràcies, Clàudia.